Integrada no Fórum Internacional de Gaia 2019. Para as boas-vindas, tenho a palavra a Senhora Vereadora do Pelouro da Cultura da Câmara Municipal de Vila Nova de Gaia, Paula Carvalhal.
Muito boa tarde a todos. Bem-vindos ao Fórum Internacional de Gaia. Em nome do Sr. Presidente da Câmara, Professor Dr. Eduardo Vitório Rodrigues, damos as boas-vindas e realmente ele pede-me para transmitir, por razões profissionais não pode estar aqui, que é realmente para ele uma grande alegria, uma grande satisfação este dia, incluído este início destas conferências, incluídas no nosso Fórum Internacional. Um cumprimento muito especial ao Dr. Rui Marques, ao IPAV, à Academia de Líderes Ubuntu, por esta parceria fantástica que nós temos com o município e com a vossa instituição, que hoje aqui, sobre este lema importante, sobre esta inspiração de Nelson Mandela, tudo parece impossível até que seja feito, iremos iniciar um ciclo de conferências que vão ser naturalmente muito inspiradoras, muito mais, continuando este espírito de inspiração, de empowerment, não é? que nós queremos para todos nós, para construirmos um futuro onde realidades impossíveis podem tornar possíveis e concretas. E um cumprimento muito, muito especial ao Sr. Presidente Dr. Ramos Horta, por estar aqui hoje connosco, o nosso orador, um dos nossos oradores, e que hoje nos honra por estar aqui já nesta conferência. Muito obrigada e sintam-se todos cumprimentados nesta inspiração também que é o seu trabalho, que foi e que ainda é e continuará a ser para nós uma fonte de conhecimento, de aprendizagem e de nós, o nosso reconhecimento pelo seu trabalho. Muito obrigada a todos, bem-vindos e excelentes conferências.
Tenho agora a palavra o Sr. Secretário-Geral do Instituto Padre António Vieira, Rui Nunes da Silva.
Então, muito boa tarde a todos. Muito obrigado, Sra. Vereadora, pelas palavras. Bem-vindos. Também em nome do IPAV e da Academia de Líderes Ubuntu, queria dar as boas-vindas a todos nesta Ubuntu Fest e na Conferência Internacional e depois do conflito, a missão dos construtores de paz. Queria começar por agradecer este momento e esta oportunidade que nos permitem de estarmos aqui todos. Primeiro à Câmara Municipal de Gaia, com o empenho com que preparou tudo, o empenho e o cuidado. Também aos nossos convidados, que tão prontamente e generosamente aceitaram vir, alguns de bastante longe, para estar connosco. E, finalmente, a todos os participantes que se mobilizaram entusiasticamente para vir até aqui. Acontece aqui nesta cidade de Gaia, tinha que ser, porque é uma cidade que referencia no desenvolvimento de uma estratégia integrada para potenciar ferramentas de capacitação Ubuntu, através dos vários projetos nesta área que vai começando a desenvolver, juntamente com o IPAV, como é o projeto Ubuntu no Bairro ou o projeto Escolas Ubuntu. E para começar, não havia melhor forma, talvez, de começar, se não fosse pelo que vamos ter, o painel que vamos ter a seguir e pela história que vamos ouvir, que é absolutamente inspiradora e transformadora para todos aqueles que pretendem ser atores principais na construção do mundo melhor, na construção de um mundo mais coeso, na defesa de uma ética do cuidado e de uma educação para a construção de pontes. Professora Cira Benosa é professora da ESAD Business and Law School, em Barcelona, também professora visitante de universidades dos jesuítas na América Central e investigadora do Instituto de Inovação Social na ESAD. É fundadora do Instituto para o Diálogo Socrático, uma organização que quer difundir o verdadeiro diálogo como ferramenta para que as empresas se envolvam com os stakeholders, para que os governos promovam a paz e fortaleçam a democracia e para que as ONGs e organizações da sociedade civil possam dar voz aos que não têm voz. Tem mais de 10 anos de experiência como consultora, trabalhando para empresas, governos, cooperações internacionais e agências das Nações Unidas. É doutorada em Filosofia, com uma tese sobre diálogo socrático. A sua formação é em Negócios e Filosofia Internacionais e é mestre em Direitos Humanos e Cidadania. Cira Benosa acredita que a maioria dos conflitos na sociedade se deve à falta de diálogo. Depois de colocar em prática o seu método de diálogo socrático em Espanha e na América Central, viajou para a Irlanda do Norte para reunir à volta de uma mesa antigos membros e simpatizantes do IRA, ex-membros e partidários de grupos paramilitares sindicalistas, um ex-soldado britânico e um ex-polícia. Juntos, embarcaram num exercício de diálogo, que, nas palavras dos próprios protagonistas, é um caminho para o desconhecido e, ao mesmo tempo, a única maneira de construir a paz. Cira?
Gracias, Rui. Gracias a IPAF por la invitación y por la organización de este fantástico evento. Gracias, Rui. Gracias a la municipalidad. Yo no quiero añadir mucho más a lo que ya ha dicho Rui. El documental que vais a ver ahora es uno de los trabajos del Instituto de Diálogo Socrático. Es una fundación desde la que intentamos usar el diálogo, llevar el diálogo a todos los rincones donde sentimos que hay alguna voz que no está siendo escuchada o que no está pudiendo ni siquiera expresarse, ¿no? El trabajo que hicimos en Irlanda del Norte ahora hace un poco más de 3 años fue una iniciativa europea en la que la idea, como veréis en el documental, era ir a sentar a personas que habían estado involucradas en el conflicto desde distintos lados y sentarles para que a través del diálogo cada una de esas partes pudiera hacer el doble juego de la expresión, que es algo muy sanador, el poder expresarnos, pero también igual de importante es tener la oportunidad de escuchar el argumento del otro y especialmente de aquel otro que más nos duele o que más daño nos ha hecho o que tiene una visión del mundo o una experiencia del mundo completamente distinta a la nuestra. Y eso es el ejercicio que veréis en torno a una mesa de diálogo. Pero aparte de eso, de sentar a personas que se habían confrontado en el conflicto, quisimos también ir a ver a otros testimonios. Y debo deciros que las 2 personas que conoceréis después de ver el documental, bien, las conoceréis primero en el documental, pero luego tendréis el placer y el honor de tenerlas aquí en primera persona. Su experiencia vital, su nobleza, su solidez, fue la experiencia más profunda y conmovedora que tuve en Irlanda del Norte. Bueno, ya lo he dicho muchas veces, pero quiero seguir diciéndolo, son dos role models, no me sale cómo es role model en castellano, son 2 modelos a seguir por la valentía que han tenido para hacer lo que han hecho en su espacio privado y luego para la generosidad que han tenido para mostrar eso en público y compartirlo como lo compartirán hoy con todos nosotros y de esa manera ir plantando semillas ahí donde van, ir de alguna forma transmitiendo el mensaje de que siempre se puede. O sea, cuando a uno le hacen daño y ahí yo vengo de Barcelona y en estos últimos años hemos vivido situaciones desagradables, nada que ver, no se puede comparar con lo que han vivido o viven otras regiones del mundo, pero es cierto que ha habido momentos duros, o sea, no es agradable que peguen a amigos tuyos o a familiares. Y decía eso, en Cataluña, algo que fue casi anecdótico, recuerdo que en su momento nos generó la sensación, incluso aquellos que apostamos por el diálogo, nos generó la sensación de que había cosas que nos costaría perdonar. Y Y siempre que hay esas situaciones, yo pienso en ellos, pienso en Pat y pienso en yo, pienso, si ellos pudieran tomar esa decisión de sentarse a hablar, ¿cómo no lo vamos a hacer todos? Porque muy probablemente el daño que nos van a hacer a lo largo de nuestra vida va a ser mucho menor que el que se dio en su caso, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, para mí es muy especial el día de hoy, porque es la primera vez que me encuentro con ellos después de la experiencia que veréis en Irlanda del Norte. Las otras personas que veréis en el documental es interesante saber, antes de verles ahí, porque les veréis, casi os diría alegremente, unos más cómodos, otros menos, pero les ves ahí. Yo creo que es importante saber que la mayoría de ellos aceptó formar parte de este ejercicio de diálogo en contra de la presión de sus comunidades. Hasta el punto que el documental se tuvo que rodar en un espacio escondido donde los representantes de ambas comunidades no pudieran saber que estábamos rodando ese documental, porque algunos de los participantes en la mesa de diálogo sabían que podían recibir amenazas de muerte si se sabía que estaban haciendo ese ejercicio en ese momento, ¿no? Y con eso quiero decir que el diálogo siempre es necesario y siempre es posible, pero a la vez no siempre es fácil, ¿no? Ahora bien, sabiendo que es probablemente la única forma en la que seres humanos pueden llegar a resolver conflictos, hay que ser valiente. Aunque estemos en contra de aquellos que tenemos en nuestro entorno, si uno se quiere hacer responsable y quiere, digamos, recoger el testigo de personas como Pat y yo, que tenemos aquí hoy, probablemente tendrá que tomar decisiones y dar pasos que no necesariamente serán bien recibidos por su comunidad, ¿no? Entonces, nada, quería contaros eso para que sepáis que yo os diría que la gran mayoría de personas que aparecen en el documental fueron muy valientes en decidir formar parte de este ejercicio. Y poco más. Lo dejo aquí y después de ver el documental seguiremos dialogando. Gracias.
My name is Sira Benotha. I'm a philosophy professor who teaches philosophy in the old Socratic way, simply by dialoguing. After practicing it in jail in Catalonia and in Central America, I have now decided to take this exercise of dialogue to Northern Ireland.
Well, to put it mildly, today is a day of opportunity.
Here in Belfast, there are still many issues to be addressed, but they have gone a long way towards reconciliation. Since the Good Friday Agreement, these steps are taken in a peaceful environment, and Catholics and Protestants even cooperate to show their most significant places to tourists.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
I'm Sarah.
It's nice to meet you, Sarah. Joe.
Hi, nice to meet you. How are you?
I'm fine, fine. Don't forget any questions you want to ask. Do
Oh,
not hesitate, okay? Oh.
great. Okay.
Murphy's Law.
yeah.
What can go wrong will go wrong. I've been doing tours for 10 years. I do them on a Saturday and a Sunday, okay? See, I've got people from all over the world. I'm an ex-political prisoner. I was in prison almost 18 years. The first time I went into prison, I wasn't involved in anything. I was totally innocent. They went to arrest my brother. My brother wasn't at home, so he just decided to take me instead. My interrogation lasted about 36 hours.
That's when you became political.
Yes, that's it. That was it.
Yeah.
No,
So that's when you said, yeah, I'm not.
Enough's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I said enough. It came to a stage where I said to myself, I'm going to have to do something. Now,
Yeah.
I'm being honest, and I'm not just saying this, I do not like violence.
Yeah.
I'm not a violent person. But it came to a stage where I says, if I don't do something, I'm being like a coward.
Yeah.
So I felt I had to do something. In every Catholic area in Belfast, there's a memorial built in recognition of the sacrifice of volunteers. And a lot of memorials, you also have the civilian dead. That's the people who were killed in the area. This here is probably one of the most impressive ones in Belfast. It's a lovely memorial. It's well kept.
And does that, like, would everybody deserve the same memorial?
Everybody goes from their own perspective. You know, I mean, from my perspective, our volunteers who fought for freedom are entitled to a memorial. You know, there people I would say, well, say I have to go past RUC memorials, British Army memorials. I accept it. I just say, well, that's it. That's the way life is. I don't particularly like it, but that's life. We all have to be tolerant like that and accept it.
Why is it that we're meeting there?
This is neutral. This is between our side and their side. We always meet about the middle. Because I couldn't go over and meet him over there, and he couldn't come and meet me. That's why we meet here. Right, cool. How are you? Okay.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
Okay.
Sarah, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm
Hi.
no large.
Hi.
I'm happy.
Nice to meet you.
Wish there'd been better circumstances.
Yeah,
Not a great
yeah,
day
not,
for doing
not the
tours.
best
Hold
weather,
up.
we must say.
Yeah, that's here. I believe you,
Okay.
folks.
Yep.
I promise.
Okay.
Okay.
For me, as a unionist, that would not be the sort of area that I would feel comfortable walking about in. And the same for nationalists who would come onto the Shankill. I became heavily involved with the UVF
Yeah,
around 1981, and I became a very active gunman.
yeah.
And eventually, after being arrested, I was given 4 life sentences and 357 years
Wow.
for all the other offences, and went down to the H blocks. And while I was in prison, when I was
How long were you in prison for?
16 years.
16.
And when I went to prison, when I was there 5 years, I turned away from violence. Wall was built because when both sides clashed, there was nothing separating them because they lived side by side in the same conditions in the streets. And after 2 nights of vicious rioting, the British Army came in to separate both sides. And the British Army's barricades were very temporary.
And when do you think this will disappear?
If you speak to the people that live in the shadow of the walls, they don't feel that there's enough confidence in their communities.
What do you think about this mural?
I think the mural is, in one way, I would like to see it being more progressive. I think there's a lot more to our culture than just gunmen. But I understand that it's a process, and we cannot just simply come along and paint over it and say that what these young men died so young for, their sacrifice is now forgotten about, because these young men have families.
I came to understand why, and how someone ends up deciding to become actively involved in an armed conflict. What's it like to be part of it? And how can one make the move towards peace? I will do that by bringing together people to sit at the same table. People who would have years ago fought against each other. Because I believe that by sitting the different voices of the same conflict around a table, we might be able to gain a better understanding of why it happened. And also, I hope this can help other regions in the world who are suffering or have suffered similar conflicts, such as the Basque Country. Winston Irvine is the spokesperson of a unionist party with political links to a paramilitary organization. Jackie MacDonald was one of the leaders of a unionist group. He spent 5 years in prison. Lee Lavis is a former British soldier. Roger McCullum is a former police officer with the Northern Irish Police. Evelyn Glenn Holmes is a Republican. The British state accused her of being a member of the IRA, but she has never been sentenced. Michael Colbert is a former member of the IRA. He spent 15 years in prison. Thank you, really, for being here and for accepting the commitment. We're really very thankful. Our aim through this and through the hours that we're going to spend together is to learn about your personal, individual experiences and processes. We believe that there are things we need to learn, and above all, we need to learn the importance of dialogue and true dialogue. When we use the term dialogue, what we believe is that dialogue always implies not trying to convince anybody, but trying to understand others. And as a first day or a first introduction, I would like each one of us to introduce ourselves.
I'm Lee Lavis. I was born in 1971 in Burton-on-Trent in the Midlands in England. I was brought up in a very sort of working class sort of background. My father had been a soldier. He'd had loads and loads of jobs. By the time I was born, was a lorry driver, and my mum was a cleaner. So when I finished school, I finished with no qualifications. So I joined the army in 1989.
Roger McCallum, 62 years of age. I was born in 1953 in Portrush, up on the north coast. I always probably thought about joining the police. I was a police officer in the Royal Ulster Constabulary and the Police Service of Northern Ireland for a total of about 28 years, from 1976 until 2004. Royal Ulster Constabulary George Cross Memorial Garden was set up in 2003. It memorialises the names of all the dead police officers, the 302 who died during the Troubles. It is very much a place of tranquility where people can go and reflect and think and remember.
He was the guy who was in the bed next to me when I was in the training centre. A guy called Kenny Lynch, Constable Kenny Lynch, and he was killed just about a year after we left the training centre on the 2nd of June 1977. A really, really nice guy. We spent 7 weeks in the same bedroom together, a dormitory, with beds beside each other. And it really brings home to you the fact, why him, why not me?
You suddenly begin to realise as you open your eyes that, there's a heck of a lot more stories to be told in Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland than maybe I was told as a child. And for example, I knew nothing about Irish history. I could tell you all about the 6 wives of Henry VIII and the English Civil War. So, you know, we have to have these uncomfortable conversations, and we have to talk to each other and empathise and hear the other person's stories, because I certainly haven't got all the truth. And it's good to talk to folk.
On, on yourself, Roger? You see, you sound as if you're insulting people when you suggest that they haven't been told the full truth about their history. I mean, from a Republican perspective, and I don't mean an insult to Jackie or yourself here now, but from our perspective, it's so obvious that we are a colonial situation.
Yep.
You know, if we were black or brown or whatever, it would be quite obvious that we were being ruled by a foreign country, because Britain in the main and its government was a white ruler who did it in Africa, who did it in India, who did it in the Near East. But because we look very like the English, people don't seem to accept that it is exactly the same situation. Do you ever think of that?
Well, very good point. But I think in relation to us, I mean, certainly, I think our family were planted here from Scotland for stealing sheep about 1608 or something. So, and we feel that this is, I suppose, our country or our area to be in. I never looked upon it as a colony. I looked upon it as part of the United Kingdom. Having said that, at the moment, I am most comfortable with the phrase Northern Irish.
You know, for me, it's fairly straightforward. You know, I'm a native of this land. I certainly don't accept that I'm a colonial person who is trying to, you know, oppress people who are, you know, working class, same as me. You know, I have no power, I have no riches, you know. So, by birthright, I'm British. I was born into the state of Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom. My name is Winston Irvine. I grew up in the Shankill area, which is predominantly Unionist, Protestant, Loyalist, working class area of Belfast. I have a very poor working class background. We're in a very beautiful building. It is the Shankill Library. I think this library represents and reflects the characteristics of this community in terms of the future and also the past. I think for me, education actually is the spine in which everything else should be attached to. One of our greatest human needs is to be understood. When we feel we are understood, we can make a connection. And I think that is true for peace building and for reconciliation.
It's quite different for me because I grew up in England. The only time I sort of remember it coming on our radar when I was growing up is when there was an incident, a British soldier was killed or someone was killed, and the general attitude amongst the people around me as I remember it was essentially those people are different to us, and we should just get out or pull out. The people in England tended not to think of it as a colony, they just sort of ignored it. It was kind of a way of abdicating sort of British responsibility.
I'm Irish. I was born in Ireland. I am Irish. The division of my country was along the lines of what could Britain hold still in Ireland, and it was the North which had the majority of loyal citizens, loyal to the Crown, and in effect my community then became hostages. So we were never welcome here. You know, we never felt that.
But I didn't feel that, Emma.
I know you didn't, but you know, I understand that. I could get angry sometimes, though. Really, the closer I come, or the closer I understand your community, to say, did you not see what was happening to us? You know, you should have been our allies. You should have been the ones saying, we're walking out of the shipyard since you won't employ a Catholic here. You know,
we were being told by the Unionists, you know, there's always been class issues here, always.
Of course.
Maybe class issues with Catholics in some ways, but there was many class issues with working class loyalism. There wasn't even loyalists then. The people didn't call anybody a loyalist. Everybody was just a unionist, a Protestant unionist. And they were telling us we never had it so good. So we believed them.
It'd be very easy for me to say, let's forget about the past and let's move forward from here and draw a line. But I think we need to do more than that, because, as Shakespeare said, the past is prologue. We need to, in some way, look at the past to see what went wrong, but not get absolutely caught up and absolutely immersed in what happened. So, 3,700 people died, 302 police officers, many, many more injured, many maimed physically and mentally. A difficult one, but I hear what you're saying.
And just a wee thing on that, when we talk about, you know, the 3,000 mark, if we extrapolated that, you know, to the USA, more people died here than died in the Vietnam War. You know, that's, I think when you make that, extrapolate those figures to show the impact, because we're a tiny, tiny place, and the impact of that many lives lost has, of course, affected our whole society. It's fractured our society.
So
it's damaged our society.
There's no single person who hasn't somehow been affected by.
You couldn't have lived here. I mean, I don't know. Probably there are some people. God knows where they're living, somewhere far away and with a big wall around their place. But I honestly don't believe that there's anyone here who has been unaffected by the trauma that was conflict.
There's something I need to do before continuing with the dialogue. I need to meet some of those people who are directly affected by the violence from all sides. I want to hear their voices and hear what they think about the present and the future of Northern Ireland.
My name is Peter Heathwood. On the 27th of September 1979, I came home from work early and the doorbell rang and my wife opened the door and she squealed, "Gunmen, gunmen." There was a struggle. I knocked one gunman down, but the second one shot me, hit the spine, which is why I'm in the wheelchair. My father seen me in the body bag and he took a heart attack and dropped dead. The attack was done by loyalists.
My name's Alex Bunting. I'm a member of the Victim and Survivors Forum for Northern Ireland. I was blown up in an undercar booby trap bomb by the IRA.
Hello, good morning everybody.
My name is Anne Travers. I'm the youngest of 6 children. I grew up in Belfast and my father was a resident magistrate. On the 8th of April 1984, he was walking home from Mass with my mum and my sister Mary, who was 23 years of age. She was shot by a separate gunman who shot her once in the back and died in my mother's arms. And with that, the gunman who'd been holding his gun underneath the newspapers started to shoot Dad, and Dad fell down. And he was shot 6 times and he survived remarkably. The gunman who shot Mary walked over and held the gun to my mum's forehead and pulled the trigger and the gun jammed. And he pulled it again and the gun jammed. And with that, the gunmen ran off. They ran down the alleyway.
What would have to happen for you to say, now we have the truth, or now we feel acknowledged, or now we feel that there is justice?
I can't forgive on behalf of my sister. That's impossible. And she, because she's dead, she has every right to justice. That human right, that basic right to life, cannot be taken away from our dead.
I do not think I will get justice, but I would like the truth. I would like the state to say, we made a mistake, we were involved, but you know, blah, it shouldn't have been you. My mother's still alive at 85, I would like her to get that truth.
I agree with my colleagues that need truth and justice, certainly I do. But am I there to try and make compromise? And I know it's hard for her to sit and talk to people who, you know, did go out and commit atrocities. And I think, well, what I would look from them is honesty and truth about what did happen, what did go on. And that's from the players, or whatever you want to call them, the terrorists on both sides, loyalist, Republican, on the governments.
In that sense, what do you think can be your role in making your dream that your grandchildren or your children live in a peaceful Northern Ireland? What role can you play in that sense?
Tell you another wee story, if the colleagues will bear with me. 1922, the foundation of the state. There was extreme violence in Belfast which killed 500 people. My father was 6 years of age. He attended a funeral of his cousin who was 17 who was shot dead. So here's 1922, my daddy's at this funeral, not knowing that 50 years later he was going to be a victim. So I do not want any of my grandchildren having to go through the same experience we all went through somewhere down the line, because in this part of the world, history does repeat itself. And if we can, by our meetings, by our conversations, by reaching out to each other and understanding each other, if we can prevent that happening in the future, we will have achieved something.
Many people say that violence doesn't start when there's a finger that pulls the trigger, but starts in people's hearts and minds and ambitions and etc. So if you were to give an explanation on why this ended up being so violent, what would you refer to?
You know, there's a whole lot of different ways of looking at it. But once the violence started, it wasn't about anything. It was about you fighting us and us fighting you. Once the violence started, logic went out the window. We just fought because that was the thing to do. It wasn't about whether it was right or wrong. It was just deemed necessary as far as I was concerned. I used to dress in the morning to put clothes on me, you know, I might be killed in these clothes, you know, and I had to look at my wardrobe for 10 minutes before I put them on, or I might be arrested in these clothes. Life wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't about your rights or my rights. It was about they're killing us, we're killing them. That's where it all degenerated to. And now, because we're having these conversations, and it's brilliant, we don't have a problem with each other, and we can sit and reason with each other and talk to each other. It's just, it came 3,700 lives too late, sort of thing. But we're here now, and we'll see what we're going to do with it.
It's 800 years for us.
Well,
800.
No, but it's not 800 years for us, because we weren't here 800 years ago.
We were. And then they came in.
No.
What we would say is that any society has to be Article 2 compliant, first of all. Any government has to be that. We also have to be cognizant of equality. If I've learned anything, if there is not true equality, if there is not true democracy, if there is not true human rights-centric society, then eventually those who feel oppressed will be forced into a corner and they will come out fighting. And the sadness of what happened here is it is the history of mankind. It is the history. I've never heard or seen any government who's went to a people with a grievance and said, what have we done wrong? Tell us in order that we can rectify it. No, they wait until the locals rebel or the natives rebel, and then they fight them, and then eventually they sit down at the table to negotiate.
I can't stop thinking that this group of people were enemies not that long ago. They could have killed each other during the conflict, and now they are talking. There were many people who made it possible. I want to meet one of them. He worked for years building bridges between the communities.
My name is Harold Good. My life has been that of a minister of the Methodist Church, which is part of the Protestant tradition. Part of my responsibility in the late 70s was as a chaplain here in the Crumlin Road prison.
We need to be honest about our history. We need to be honest about our politics.
You mean truth is necessary to move on?
Absolutely. Not just truth about what happened during these troubles, but I'm talking about an honest understanding of our history, which brought us into this conflict. Well, we need to be honest about what we didn't do, as well as what we did do. I mean, there was injustice in this part of Ireland.
So that's how you explain, in the end, the reason why it all started?
Yeah.
Because of discrimination.
Yeah. And we were silent when we should have been speaking about that. You know, we should be honest about that.
Speaking about that discrimination.
Yeah, and confronting it. But our politicians didn't want us to deal with those issues.
And why did that discrimination start?
It's a very familiar story. It's the story of a settler people and a native indigenous people trying to share the same piece of ground. Now, where have you heard that story before? What?
In many places.
Many places. North America, South Africa, your own country. When we were trying to work through this whole business of the early release of prisoners within the Good Friday Agreement, people were very troubled by this. And I remember inviting a man called Brian Curran whose name you may be familiar with, a South African lawyer involved in their process. And I asked him to come and talk about the South African experience. And after he'd spoken, somebody said, "But Brian, what about justice?" And he said, "This isn't about justice. You can't go to a widow and an orphan and say, we're releasing the killer of your loved one in the interest of justice." He said, "This is not about justice." He said, "This is about giving all parties to the conflict an opportunity to share in a new beginning, whether you believe they deserve it or not." And I said, "Brian, that's interesting. Our word for that is grace." And he said, "Well, if that is your word, keep preaching it, because you're going to need an awful lot of it." And how right he was. But without that generosity, grace, call it what you will, we can't really move forward from a situation of conflict. Giving each other an opportunity to share a new beginning, whether or not we feel we or they deserve it. That's grace.
Wow. The concept of grace keeps spinning around in my head. Now I'm aware of the amount of empathy, generosity and effort that is required to overcome such a conflict.
Today, I would like to explore, let's say, the next step. So when you decide to engage, meaning when Roger decides to engage in the RUC, or when Lee decides to engage in the British Army, in the UDA, in the IRA. And especially, I'm interested in the emotions that were like behind that engagement and along the fight.
I don't know. I'd never given much credence to the term folk memory, but somewhere there was an awareness in me of our militant past within republicanism. Although there was no real republicanism, activism in the late 1960s. But within the civil rights, there was a rumbling of something's going to have to happen. But then I was just too busy chasing my girlfriend and playing football. But then Bloody Sunday would have been the catalyst for me.
And how do you remember that moment, like that moment of maybe enough is enough, or?
It was quite scary, because I didn't know anybody doing anything within that situation. I didn't know anybody. I spent about 2 or 3 months seeking out the IRA, and they were all around me, but I didn't know who the hell they were. No, that's true.
And how did that work? How would you?
Eventually, I literally asked the man in the bar.
And he gave you?
Well, he eventually got somebody to make contact with me. But I mean, I couldn't find the IRA, and it was all around me. So that's that. And then thereafter, I mean, I suppose
and were you scared back then?
Yeah, I was scared, yeah.
Because you knew what that would entail, that decision.
Yeah. I was a social worker. So I wasn't a child. I think I was 24 years of age, you know. So I wasn't, a 17-year-old with a lot of time in my hand. I was full-time in work. But I must have been grown into that awareness, but I didn't know at the time. That's me. I'm a former IRA prisoner. The area which I would have lived in as a young man was a very Republican area. I took part in a few marches, a bit of radicalisation, but not much. But then Bloody Sunday happened, and I realised that politically I had to be aware, because civil rights weren't going to be given. So thereafter I joined the IRA. And I am director of Costja in the Near Kimmy. I head up a network of 12 offices which looks after the interests of the former IRA prisoners in Ireland. It's very, very difficult for political ex-prisoners here to get work. People think with the armed conflict over that everything is sorted. There is a peace, but it's not a peace with justice.
I have a very different question now. I guess living in conflict or living in war, however we want to call it, affects every dimension of our lives. And I'm interested in understanding, according to you, how that affected friendship, for example, or how that might affect love.
I had the perfect life. I had a great job, playing football, cricket, perfect family. Life could not have been better. And the more involved I got in paramilitary activity, I lost everything. Just, I had to make a decision. I'm lucky my family still speaks to me. You know, we sort of went through the bad times. So what I never realised was when I wasn't living at home, every time there was a body found, they thought it was me.
There used to be a saying, probably existed in your community too, that sometimes women were relieved when their husbands were captured.
Women were relieved?
Relieved, because you knew where he was. Well, maybe not relieved might be too strong a word, but there was, although it was bad being captured and they knew that they were going to prison, but at least there was one thing, you knew they weren't going to die. You know, they were going to walk out of prison. And I think that there's, whilst a lot of the discussion does, and academic research does centre around ex-prisoners and their role in the peace process, etc., but I think there's an untold story there of the women who ran to those jails for years and years and kept the family unit together, you know, and they're the unsung heroes of keeping the community and their families going. I grew up in a small Catholic ghetto of the Short Strand in East Belfast. It was a nationalist area. I'm the daughter of an IRA man. I am the granddaughter of an IRA volunteer, so republicanism is very much a part of my life. My life's philosophy would be that, simplistically, I am always on the side of the oppressed and I will never be on the side of the oppressor. They are the wives and mothers and family members of IRA prisoners and of IRA martyrs. By providing a space like this for them to come together, not to mourn, maybe sometimes to cry, but mainly to laugh and to know that there's someone there who understands exactly where you're coming from and what your experience has been.
Just one thing I'll never understand. Every damn rebel seems to be a man.
I wasn't in the UDA initially. I was a vigilante. And people in the UDA had asked me time and time again to join, but I was happy. I had a great wife, 2 kids. I lived in a house, an executive house. Life was perfect. And Bloody Friday happened, and my mother died, and then a fella came and asked me just at the right time, and I got sworn in that night. And we're all waiting on the commander coming back from Sandy Row, and he walked in and says, "We'll not be wearing masks anymore in the street." So I never wore a mask, well, not on the street. That night, we went out on patrol round to Murray, and a few of us, after we did the official bit, a few of us were just walking about in our ordinary clothes, and the RUC stopped us and said, "Who are you?" He says, "We're Liverpool Supporters Club." And one of them says to me, "Do you think there's any need for the UDA around to Murray, because there's never any trouble?" And I says, "Well, maybe that's because there's a UDA." And he says, "I have to watch you." That was too quick an answer, he said. So when we got back, I got promoted. I was only in the UDA a couple of hours and I got promoted.
That's the quickest promotion in history.
But it just progressed from there. Once the conflict began, I changed. Circumstances changed. Adrenaline going out doing things that shouldn't really have been doing. I was drinking too much sometimes. I was having affairs, to tell you the truth. And my home life just totally broke down. That's the Ulster Defence Association and the Ulster Freedom Fighters. that means so much, even to the community members here. Those two organisations, although they're inextricably linked, they are the key. They are the protectors of this estate, if you like, still in people's minds. This is probably the most emotional part of Northern Ireland for me, this particular piece of ground here. Don't believe that loyalism should be involved in any sort of criminality, drug dealing, whatever. There was a time that was necessary. Loyalist paramilitaries robbed banks, robbed Securicor vans, extortion and building sites. I was guilty of it myself. But once the conflict ended, there was no need for that anymore. The greatest security risk to me since I got out of prison was through feuds within loyalism, within the Ulster Defence Association. I lived in the second house there. There was trees in all the gardens, there was bushes, all had to be cut down. There was a barrier across the street here. There was people in a flat upstairs. For 6 months, 24 hours a day, there was security on my house. That never happened when we were fighting Republicans, never. And so when it was internal, that was the biggest threat. I was getting 2 death threats a day from people who used to be colleagues or comrades.
The disruption that they put on the community, and they accepted that. They willingly come out, they fed us, give us hot drinks, coffee, tea. So it was cold, it was wet, people had to go to their work the next morning. But again, and the disruption to the community, but the community never complained. They come out and welcomed us, they fed us, they give us hot drinks, and they said, keep it up lads, you're doing a good job. And we stuck it out for 6 months, and at the end we won.
I tried to get that stopped.
He tried to get it stopped, but no.
If you don't let these fellas go home, they'll be shooting me.
No.
In your previous thinking, you would have reflected on the fact that you might end up in jail, you might end up having to do
whatever.
Mm-hmm. You were aware of all that?
Yeah.
But when I joined the UDA in 1972, I didn't join the UDA to kill anybody. We joined it to defend our village. We walked around the streets of the Murray every night. There was about 40 men in the company. A mile up the road was Seymour Hill, which was sort of 2 estates put together. There was 80 or 90 UDA men there. But nobody had joined it to kill anybody. It was purely a defensive organisation at that time. You know, that was one decision, and then you make more decisions. You just didn't make one decision in your life or through the conflict. You make a series of decisions. You decide what level, or if you're going to go any further than you've already been. And that's all because of what's happening around you. And so we were reactionary in many ways. You know, we reacted to IRA violence.
Yeah, I'd agree with him.
Agree?
To a degree. I agree that probably the majority of people who eventually moved in saw it like that. But our activities, per se, were against the state and its apparatus. Now, I can understand Jackie and his friends interpreting actions, which included some of them, as being against them. You know, there were bombings which literally went wrong in the IRA. I hope they've apologised for them, which went wrong. But in the main, it was the state. I mean, you don't put bombs off in towns because you don't like a person. There has to be an ideological underpinning why somebody would learn how to make a bomb and go out and plant it and blow it up. You know, it can't be because I don't like him. Well, it shouldn't be because of that. And in the case of the Republicans, it wasn't because of that. But naturally, and unfortunately, innocent people were killed. That's my view.
So in his case, he would say, I wanted to defend ourselves. You would say, we wanted to fight against the government. Did it feel that way, Roger? How was it for you?
You know it's not personal. You know that the attack, whether it be a stone or whether it be a bullet or whether it be an explosion, is against the uniform or against what the uniform represents, rather than you as an individual.
For me, from an individual level, I come to the conflict from a different point of view altogether. I'm looking to escape where I'm from, and I'm looking for a job and some status. So I joined I remember in them days that they used to have an ideal recruit that was in all the advertisements called Frank. And when I used to walk past the Army Careers Office, I seem to remember Frank was doing a lot of skiing, a lot of canoeing, and he seemed to be standing around in bars with his mates a lot. I don't remember Frank being dressed in an army uniform on the border in South Armagh or patrolling West Belfast. So I joined the army, and by virtue of joining the army, I had the perception I was being sent to be at war with the IRA, that I was fighting the IRA. When I got involved in reconciliation work, dialogue work, and once I got involved with bringing British soldiers back to Northern Ireland for them to visit and meet with the people that they'd only previously interacted with as soldiers. Once I got involved in that kind of work encompassing those two kinds of fields, it was quite natural that ultimately that I would come into contact with members of families and individuals whose lives have been directly impacted on by the actions of the British Army or individual British soldiers. And it was through this context that I met someone I would consider my best friend, Fiona Gallagher. Fiona's brother was killed by a member of the British Army in the early 1970s.
It wasn't that it was never going to be a case that I would never speak to somebody who was from the forces. It was just a case of there was never an opportunity. When you're in the middle of your own grief, you don't see outside of that. It's always about the hurt that's happened to you or your people.
You or yours.
And that is, and I have said that myself. I was guilty of that for a long time. Just been in that bubble of this is all about my grief. But it's I think I suppose really to be honest, Lee, it was whenever I had the children. Then it was like looking at them and thinking that they were never going to grow up the way I grew up. For one, I didn't want that for them. But I was so determined in my mind that I was never going to pass on to them, you know, a hatred or a bitterness or a real prejudice against anybody who was Protestant, anything different, or in the army, or English, or whatever, because it never worked for me.
Do you want to know one of the great ironies I find of being involved in the kind of interactions I'm involved with the nationalist community? The kind of conversation we have now isn't usually the kind of conversation we have, is it? We're usually chatting
on the phone.
as mates and things like that. We don't see it. Our relationship isn't defined by the fact that your brother was killed by the British Army and I was a British soldier. I think we'd be mates even if that wasn't the case.
Exactly.
We came together because of that.
What was your role? Like, what was one day of your life?
I saw it as my role was to patrol, and if I saw a man with a gun who was going to harm me, harm any of the people with me, or harm a member of the civilian population, my job was to stop him doing it by killing him if need be. I was never taught to shoot guns out of hands or to wound people in legs. I was taught to shoot them. That's how I saw my role. And if I saw a gunman with a gun or with a detonator box, I certainly wasn't going to stop beforehand and say, "Are you loyalist or are you?" He was getting. That's how simplified I saw my enemy. I didn't think in terms of loyalism, unionism, republicanism.
And how do you feel the day after? So after the first day, you have to go out in the street and shoot somebody.
Well, it wasn't like that. The first day that you go out and
it's traumatizing.
You worry more about being shot than they are.
Yeah, I don't know how to frame the question.
I think Jackie makes a very good point.
Yeah.
Your major thought isn't to go out and harm someone.
No,
it's more you being harmed. So my major preoccupation was with
there's one day where you have to do it, I guess.
I can remember being out on patrol and the patrols coming under fire. With on one occasion medium machine gun fire. The patrol comes under fire. You don't think about what's coming at you. You immediately go into that sort of training mode where contact, wait out, enemy left, you swing to the right. You go into all those mechanisms of sort of survival attack that you go into that's part of your training. So I can't really describe the emotions at the time of being shot at or shooting at someone else. I can describe the emotions afterwards. I can describe the emotions now. I mean, afterwards, you would get back and you'd have a little bit of time to your room, and you'd have a bit of a shake, and maybe sometimes you'd be sick, particularly if it had been a particularly close shave. One guy in our regiment captured an IRA man in South Armagh in 1984. He got the military medal. Once you get an award of that size, your career is in the army's made. He was still a sergeant when I was touring for Manor in 1992. His whole career was made off doing that, so I desperately wanted to capture or kill an IRA man. So at the time, I would have been kicking myself that I don't think I harmed anyone, but now I'm very, very grateful. That was an uber patriot and wanted to be a hero and be someone glorious and be known for doing glorious acts for my country.
You weren't going out for a medal. You were going out to do something and hopefully get away with it. You know, it wasn't about medals.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it was just, that's what you had to do. That's where the circumstances took people. And I spoke to young lads in both the UVF and the UDA, and members of the Red Hand as well. And I said, you don't get medals. See, every time you lift a drink, that's a medal. As time went on and the troubles progressed, people were actually wanted people to know. They wanted a notoriety. The troubles had went on that long. And those people saying, there's your man there, you know, everybody knew who he was, or everybody knew Lenny Murphy, or everybody knew Andy Terry, or everybody knew somebody, and wanted to say, I want to be like him. Those people being bullied at school, or maybe they were insignificant in their community, and you give them a gun, or you give them something to do, all of a sudden they are somebody. They've got some sort of respect in the community. They're not being bullied anymore.
How would you describe the organizations that you represented? Do you feel you had the chance to ask questions?
To give you an idea, when we used to sit down in the cookhouse for our dinner, an officer would walk round and say, any complaints with the food? And the first person who turned around and went, well, actually, the officer would go and get him second helpings. So that was how much of a right we had to complain about even our basic treatment. You couldn't even complain about the food.
Michael, was it the same in the IRA? You were not allowed to ask questions, to raise questions?
I could only talk from personal experience. I'm not aware of any situations where there overly was need to question.
There was no need to question?
I'm just talking from memory. I can't remember any.
In the early days of the UDA, for example, because they were a defensive organisation, there was no problem asking questions because nobody had been there before. But once the Ulster Freedom Fighters came into being, came into existence, if anybody wanted to be in the Ulster Freedom Fighters, there was no questions asked. The question asked was, if you want to be in this, you're in it, and that's it. Once you took that step, or once anybody took that step, there was no question to be asked. It was, you did what you were told.
I already spent some days with them, and I understand why they engaged in conflict. But I still want to discover the personal journey of someone who has turned away from violence and faces a victim. How is it possible to come to terms when you've hurt somebody?
Hello.
Sure.
Hello. Hi, Pat. Nice
How
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Joe. Hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. How brought you together? Pat, if you want to tell me what brought you to Joe. Like, what's your connection, let's say?
Quite apart from the obvious one that I killed Joe's father. It was the peace process and being released as part of that process.
What do you mean you killed her father?
I killed Joe's father in an IRA operation.
What happened?
Well, I was responsible for Joe's father's death because I was in the IRA, and the IRA planted a bomb in a hotel where the Tory, the Conservative Party at the time, were holding a conference nearby, and the IRA targeted that hotel. So I had responsibility for that. And I was sentenced in '85 and sentenced to life, but because of the peace process was released after 14 years. You're coming out into this new situation and looking at the past and wondering what you can do to, you know, heal perhaps, you know. And a big part of that would be sitting down, talking to people we'd hurt, relatives of people we'd hurt.
And that first meeting was very, very intense. There was just the two of us in our own room, nobody else there. And when Pat came, he was very polite and showed sensitivity, and then he talked about his political reasons of joining the IRA. And I'd met other men and women who'd been in the IRA, so I was quite familiar with the political reasons. And I was just sort of thinking, time to end it. And then there was this moment of silence, followed by Pat looking at me and saying, I don't know anymore who I am. I want to hear your anger and your rage, and what can I do to help you? Now I was meeting, you know, the real human being beyond the label. And so about another hour I couldn't sustain it anymore, and so I thanked him, and he said, I'm really sorry I killed your dad.
I don't think I knew at the time what it was about, but it was a disarming moment for me, where I feel, in a sense, that I was jilted, you know, out of my orbit. Wasn't sure of my own thinking at that point. And again, I think it goes down to that, how profound that moment was. Just sitting, talking with somebody, and you've killed their father. I think this is something that happens in conflict. You act on this reduced view of those you're in conflict with. You don't, possibly can't, see them in the fullness of their humanity. And I think that can only be at the expense of your own humanity.
So after all these years, 15 years since you met, Joe, what have you learned from Pat?
I have empathy and understanding with all the players in the conflict. But it doesn't mean I don't understand why people would use violence, but I think as soon as we create one victim, we're more likely to create another victimizer, and the cycle goes on and on. So I'm interested in ending the cycle in me, and this is really what it's about. I'm ending that cycle of violence and revenge. And so Pat's been my teacher in about healing that in myself. So it's like a mirror. So if I go back into blaming and wanting to make him responsible for my pain, then I'm back in that cycle.
What word would you use to explain or describe your bond?
The thing with friends is, I fall out with them all the time. I'm always falling out with friends, to be perfectly honest. What I can say, definitely, I take more care not to fall out with Joe, because I think it's this awareness, heavy awareness of how important this is. You want to protect that. Joe's one of the few people I know I can have that level of conversation with, that somebody I've actually hurt. I know that I have friends in the movement, I can sit and talk to them. It exists at that level, and I'd be, careful of those conversations too, But with friends, I mean, we fall out with them all the time. And it doesn't mean to say that we have at times been so strained that we decided we couldn't do it, But we all seem to come back to it,
I don't think I've heard that before. I'm really touched by it. But
it's been hard. Yeah, I find it amazing how, because I completely understand how hard it must be for both of you to stay there and No, I'm not. Because the easiest way is to leave.
I'm deeply touched by Pat and Joe. It takes more courage to meet the victimizer than to continue the violent circle. And it also takes more courage to meet the victim and say sorry, to acknowledge the hurt you've provoked than anything else. These two courageous people should be a role model for all of us.
There was a country in the world today in the situation we were in 1969-70, and they asked for our advice. How would we advise them?
Talk.
And it wouldn't be the armed struggle.
Yeah, but
No,
no, I'm saying talk and be heard.
Like you had said, no. Does that mean that, you know, so the logic of that position is that you would advise citizens now, wherever in the world, if the conditions weren't right, that they should take up arms?
Well,
no, I'm asking the question. Take up arms and kill people in this day and age in the 21st century?
Well, I suppose the basic answer is yes. However, I'll have to qualify it. Listen, if the circumstances exist which warrant it, I've no moral qualms about it at all. If there's injustice, it has to be fought. Now, and I would say to you, people go, I'll give you a wee example here. We have a lot of American students come to us and ask us, why did you engage in violence? And I say, how did you get the British out of your country? They killed them in the 1700s. You know, they killed them, they forced them out by the point of a gun. And I say, don't come over here and moralise to us about using violence. What are you doing in Afghanistan? What are you doing in Iraq?
I was talking to the Victims Commission the other day, and do you think justice and truth can be compatible?
You know, some of the victims want to know who shot their father, who shot their husband, or who shot their brother. But if the UDA or the UVF or the IRA sent out a 17-year-old to rap the door of number 36, and if a man answers it, shoot him. You know, these things did happen. The IRA or the UDA or the UVF killed that man. Does it matter who the 17-year-old was? He never saw the man in his life before. He didn't know who he was. He was just told to go and put a bomb under that car, shoot whoever comes out of that door, or whatever. The individual was only doing what he was told. He had no malice or no personal grievance against the individual. That's what he joined that particular organisation to do, and that's what he did. So the IRA is guilty, and the UVF's guilty, the Ulster Freedom Fighters and UDA is guilty. You know,
Where's the state forces?
Why do they need to have to know?
No, I understand, but I'm saying, what about the
that you were
British Army as well?
In that situation that you were describing, how can justice be applied, or what would be just in such a situation?
Well, I've always said there is no answer to this. There certainly is no simple answer to this. The nearest I can get to it is no more victims. That's the key to this. We have to make sure no more victims. So do we draw a line in the sand, no matter how difficult that may be for people? It's like the victims. They have an argument, but they're holding everybody back. The way I describe it is, we're all trying to get through a door, and the victims group comes along like a big swan with its wings open, and we can't get through the door. We need to get through that door, or eventually there will be more victims.
I actually think we do need to think strategically about a policy framework in which to locate this whole discussion, because if it's not within the context of embedding and sustaining peace, then I think it's a fundamental flaw and mistake.
I think conflicts are totally over with the generation shift. I want to hear the voices of teenagers from a school that integrates Protestants and Catholics. So I've heard you were all born on 1998. So that means you were born after
Good Friday.
Friday Agreement. And how does that sound like when you hear all those stories that your parents tell you?
It's hard to believe, like definitely, because because we grew up in such a peaceful environment, it's hard to believe that only 18 years ago we were like this. So it's definitely a big change.
Do you even know about each other? Like, would you know?
No, well, when we came here, I didn't. Nothing ever came into my mind to go, are you Protestant or are you Catholic?
Exactly.
It doesn't.
No one would ask.
There's no need to, because you're an integrated school, and it never even would have crossed my mind anyway to think like that.
It wouldn't even affect you, you know, if say like this guy I've been friends with recently is a Protestant, you're not going to be like, you know, it's not a big shocker. It's just kind of like,
So what?
So
No,
what?
like,
Exactly.
And how do you see the future?
You would love to see more integrated schools so more people can experience this, because I have friends who go to predominantly Protestant schools, and if I was like, oh, my best friend's a Catholic, they're like, what? Like, why are you even talking to them? So just because they haven't experienced that friendship, you know, that kind of thing. So I just think personally, if there's more integrated schools, then everyone will be friends with each other, and the conflict that there may still be will be completely gone.
If all schools were integrated, there would be no problems. And what's going to happen when your generation goes into politics?
I think there'll be a massive change. Big time. I think there'll be a big change.
The fact that we'll move forward through a generation that hasn't seen people killing each other in the streets every day, we will be a lot less embittered thinking in the future of politics. So Northern Ireland can really move forward as one country and not just as separate two communities together.
So in a way, you'll be more like looking into the future and not as much in the past.
You just need the right person. So say someone in our generation to stand forward and say, we need to change. We need to move on and forgive.
The kids that I would work with in South Belfast, they can't identify with politics because they've no faith in politicians. You know, loyalism in some areas has become vandalism. Dignity is so important. If we can all appreciate how dignified loyalism needs to be to make progress, and give the young people the benefit of our experiences, they can learn from our mistakes.
We're approaching the end, and we've been talking about closure today. So I would like to give the opportunity to share some thoughts.
The one thing that being involved in this kind of work, as I listen to everyone at the table, you listen to the context in which each of them made their decisions, and there's an empathy there, because I could imagine following the same course if I was subject to exactly the same pressures. And I think if you'd have been, some of you at least, or if you'd have been born in the Midlands where I was from, facing the world that I was facing, you may have followed my path into the army. So that I kind of have a respect of all the paths you've taken, because I've tried to understand the context.
It all seems so natural, maybe, to see us sitting around a table like this.
Yeah.
You know, this is fantastic. I think we have known each other for years, and we've never been aggressive to each other, but we've never been the best of friends at times. You know, we've been objective, and we've said a few words, you know, contradictory. But I haven't had a problem with Michael.
We do tend often to dwell on the negatives and what still needs to be done. And I think sometimes we forget how much we have achieved. The fact that we're sitting here in the first place can only point to greater understanding in the future.
You know, all of us here, I'm sure I'm not very popular with some of my own constituency by being here today, but, you know, somebody's got to show a lead and go forward and discuss and debate. So it's about talking, it's about trusting, it's about addressing fear, it's about showing leadership, and very importantly, it's about listening to the other person's story, because for many years we didn't listen. We were right, everybody else was wrong. But it's not as simple as that. Everybody has an equally valid story to tell.
Okay, well, before we leave, I wanted to acknowledge your courage. I hope more and more people here and elsewhere in the world have the same courage that you have shown to engage in dialogue. I want to thank you for your commitment. I hope anyone who's interested can see what you have done, because I also agree with you that this can be very useful. These 6 people and the whole country have embarked on a long journey from violence to peace. There's so much that we can learn from them. No matter how much violence a community has suffered, once enemies start a dialogue, everything is possible. I'm leaving this country even more certain of the power of dialogue.
Bueno, yo siempre, mira que la he visto veces, la película, pero sigue dejándome que necesito unos minutos para recolocarme. Ahora vamos a iniciar un diálogo con Pat y yo en unos instantes. Solo una pequeña anécdota para que os hagáis la idea de la intensidad que hay detrás de un ejercicio así, porque no sé si se ve cuando uno ve el documental o no, pero recuerdo que, o sea, el tiempo que pasé en Irlanda del Norte, estuve haciendo este ejercicio, estuve cada noche teniendo pesadillas de cosas que le habían ocurrido a las personas con las que estaba dialogando y captando, supongo que cuando alguien es más o menos poroso o empático, captan necesariamente este tipo de cosas. Y fue en ese sentido una experiencia tan intensa que terminé muy enferma. No sé si se ve a lo largo de la película como mi cara se va, no sé, bueno, cambiando hacia peor. Terminé muy enferma de estar en ese ejercicio de diálogo, absorbiendo al final todo el dolor y el sufrimiento que tantas personas han tenido que atravesar en Irlanda del Norte, ¿no? Pero bueno, en todo caso, ahora ya están aquí, Pat y yo, y me gustaría invitaros al escenario. Voy a mover las sillas, si es posible, para colocarnos de una manera quizás un poco más agradable para dialogar. No veo a nadie de la organización. Bueno, si nadie me dice lo contrario, voy a mover las sillas para colocarlas, eso, más como un diálogo entre los tres, aunque no estemos solos, pero ¿sí? ¿Nadie dice que no? Ok, pues voy a mover las sillas. So, Pat and Joe, if you want to... quizás en medio del escenario, diría, I was suggesting that maybe we can move the chair so that we can speak. No sé si ya quizás funciona este. No sé si la luz... Sí, algo así. I was wondering, maybe like this. Sure. Or would you prefer something different? No, it just felt a bit
Yeah.
strange, no, to have a conversation there. Or should I sit in one of them?
You sit in the middle.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some water would be lovely. I love these chairs, look.
Does this work? Yeah. So, Pat and Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Will we need the microphones?
No.
These haven't yet.
This should work.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah? No? Somebody says no? Yes? Okay. Should we all check? Can you say hello?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Good. Good. Okay. So, well, actually, this is the first time that we watched the movie together. Right? So, is it me?
Can we try this one?
Sure. How do I do this? Okay. Now? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So, so this is the first time that we watched the movie together. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is, so after what we've heard and seen, if you want to start, but what would you like to add to what we have just already seen?
Remember that film was made 3 years ago, and things have moved on. I think there is less optimism now than then. I'm not saying we're going back to war, I'm not saying that. I just feel there is more tension now in the situation in Ireland, possibly largely because of Brexit. But we haven't really seen much chance for the dialogue we all wanted to really develop. And that's unfortunate. And that is a victim of Brexit. People are more inclined not to talk because of the fear generated by change.
Wow. Would you have expected that? So before the Brexit?
We're going through a transition in Ireland, in the political situation, where there is a possibility of reunification of the north and the south of the islands within a few years because of demographic changes. That's going to be difficult because there's a lot of fear generated, which means it has to be carefully managed. And in the middle of all that, then we have Brexit. And that's thrown a bit of a grenade into the middle of a difficult situation. So again, I just make that point. That's the big difference I see. I would imagine we'd have been further along the line of seeing dialogue producing good effect over the last 3 years if it hadn't have been for Brexit.
Interesting. Joe, what would you like to add?
I'd like to sort of go back to the beginning, really, because I imagine there's some questions about why did I want to meet Patrick, and why, after all these years, are we still meeting? And for me, when the bomb went off and killed my father, this is back in 1984, I actually lived in peacetime. I lived in England. I wasn't worried about the IRA. I had a very carefree life. But the moment the bomb went off and my father was killed, that changed. And I'm now part of a war. I'm part of a violent conflict. I have an enemy. And so within 2 days, I decided to go on a journey to think, how can I bring something positive out of this? How can I not have an enemy? How can I want to understand why someone would use violence. So that was back in 1984, and it was only in the peace process, after peace process, when Patrick came out of prison, that it became a possibility for me to meet him. And I didn't tell anyone. It was something that I personally wanted to do. It was private, I was never going to go public. And I saw it as a one-off meeting. And I didn't go for an apology, I didn't mean anything to me, but I just went to see him as a human being. Because that bomb had taken some of my humanity away, because someone had wanted my father killed, or the British government, because my father worked for the British government. So I wanted to put a human face to all the enemy, the labels of the enemy. And as I said during that meeting, well, it's just the two of us in a little room in a house in Dublin. There was no prepared space, prepared environment, or no support, just the two of us, even closer than this. And I remember looking at Patrick and thinking, you don't look like someone who's killed my father, whatever that person would look like. But more than that, I was curious. What is the story? Who is he beneath all the labels he'd been given? And I remember the point when I looked into Patrick's eyes and I saw that he cared. He cared for his community. And that was what I needed. And that's when I wanted to end the meeting, because he was justifying politically why the Brighton bomb had been a good strategy. And I understood that. I knew he'd do that. And then there was this moment where Patrick changed. And that was the beginning of another journey, a new journey, which was, it feels like we're still on. And that was a real moment which you captured so well when I said, I haven't heard this before. And we've spoken together and shared platforms 300, 400 times, and yet we're still learning. We're not here with everything sorted and learned. It's an ongoing journey and exploration and transformational. And it can be really, really, really hard. But the more that I listen to Patrick, the more I understand the roots of conflict, and the more committed I am to creating a world where nobody uses violence, where people always have different choices. Because I believe that if everyone had a choice, then they wouldn't choose violence. And Patrick talks about the cost to his own humanity. And he now knows he could have sat down and had a cup of tea with my dad, but the Conservative government didn't have a policy of cups of tea. So it's a shared responsibility. This conflict is a shared responsibility. It's not about the goodies and the baddies, the right and the wrong. We're all part of it together.
Well, there are missed voices in that dialogue. One of the speakers actually alluded to the lack of presence in the room. The people with the real power, who were the most culpable for the violence, were the governments, particularly the British government, who were historically responsible for the partitioning of the country, and on many degrees responsible for the duration of the conflict. If we're going to look honestly at what is needed in terms of the dialogue, they all have to be included. You know, if we're talking about seeking truth, then you have to widen that conversation to just the participants in the room that you filmed, and filmed well, I think. I go back to the time when I was about to be released, in the months prior to being released under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. I'd spent at that point about 14 years in prison. I was coming out into this new situation of hoping to be able to contribute to the building of the peace. What could I do? And because I had spent some time reflecting on the conflict in prison, I believed I would be sitting around similar tables talking to other participants in that conflict, whether they would be former British soldiers or the array of unionist, loyalist organisations we were in conflict with, and also to the victims of our actions. So I was geared to that. I came out, and it was very much a political objective. I felt this is what we need to do to move things forward. Until though I was sitting, listening and talking with Joe, the full impact of actually the profundity of sitting with the victim, that's when it hit home. And I think from that moment, for me, the dialogue did change, and that's, I believe, is what Joe saw. She saw that change in that moment, that the political hat came off, and then I had to deal with the personal tragedy of it. And I thought I was going along to meet a victim. I would try with some sensitivity to explain my motivations and objectively deal with it, thinking, well, if I can put that operation into some form of context, explain my motivations, what we were trying to achieve, that might do some good, some good. And I didn't think beyond that. So I thought it would be a one-off meeting. But again, because of suddenly realised the pain I'd hurt in that moment of sitting with a victim, I left and knew that there was more needed to be said, but with no real appreciation that Joe would ever want to meet me again. It would be, I wanted to meet her, I wanted to continue that conversation, but I felt I couldn't make that approach. I felt that would be wrong. I can explain that if you wish me to. But luckily, Joe also felt this need to continue the dialogue. And we've met, Joe's mentioned it, I lost count. I've lost count. Certainly a couple of hundred times. And it's always difficult. I would hate just to imagine that because we're sitting here, that it's easy, that we're just going over the same ground. But you can't do that. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't put yourself in a position to do that. It's difficult. And over the course of 18 years, you know, the dialogue has moved. A deeper understanding, I think. We haven't fundamentally changed some of our core beliefs. I'm still an Irish Republican. I would still hold to the notion that what we did in terms of the overall struggle was necessary, not trying to defend all aspects of that struggle. But, and that's an enormous bridge between myself and Joe, because Joe is totally opposed to violence, I believe. But Joe can speak for herself on that. But the important thing is the necessity of continuing the dialogue, as long as we both feel up to it, you know. Both feel, and because we feel it's important. My understanding of the conflict is, if you want to get out of it, or if you want to ensure that you don't get into conflict, contact and dialogue. So those two words, build on it, and but also be conscious of the fact that people try to prevent you doing that. Will stop you getting together to have those conversations, because it's not in our interest for people to together see the world, you know, with one set of eyes. A lot of vested interests out there, but it's to encourage. We're doing this to encourage how dialogue and contact can work.
And you both described that first meeting by saying that you approached Joe in the first moment wearing the political hat, right? And what made you suddenly shift and then have Joe see the real human being, as you were saying, no? Or?
I'm not saying I was conscious of what was happening in the immediacy of sitting with Joe. I did a lot of thinking afterwards, and a couple of things struck me. One, Joe was listening very carefully to what I was saying, and I wasn't used to that. If you're an Irish Republican in that struggle, there was more effort put into silencing you. And here's somebody who would perhaps have least need to listen to me because I killed her father. And yet she's sitting there and really listening to what I was saying. You know. And also, she's telling me something about herself, and very significantly about her father. This is the person I killed. She's telling me something about her father. I can't say an exact point where I drew this lesson from, but the lesson was that I was perceiving what a fine woman this is. This is a fine person. She's a fine human being. I'm getting this sense that a lot of this came from her father. The qualities I see here, in some measure, came from this man, and I killed him. And therefore, I killed a very fine human being. You know, before I wouldn't have thought of him like that. I wouldn't have thought of him at all. He would have been a total cipher to me. He would have been a Tory MP, and in the context of conflict, we'd be in struggle against people who were wearing different uniforms. We weren't thinking of them in terms of their humanity. I'm pretty sure that in all conflicts, that's a necessary part of the struggle, that you end up with this reduced view of the people you are in conflict with. And then suddenly I'm in this room with Joe, and I became very deeply aware of that, you know, and that was an awakening moment for me, and that came through contact and dialogue.
Yeah. So first, her, by listening, recognizing you or acknowledging your humanity, and then in turn, yes, also you. The two of you, sometimes together, sometimes on your own, are sharing your experience in several different countries and environments that are suffering conflict or have suffered conflict. And you're very well received wherever you go, except for sometimes in your own home, let's say. Why do you think that is the case? Why is it, in a way, so easy for you to speak like you're doing now in a different region, part of the world, and instead, in the place where you could resonate the most to your audience, there's less audience, or there's an audience that doesn't want to listen to you? How do you explain that situation?
The situation is still raw. There's so much pain out there that hasn't been dealt with. Individuals deal with it, small groups deal with it, but those efforts are separated, under-resourced, not acknowledged. Meetings are held secretively. People don't want to broadcast the fact that they're meeting with somebody from the other community. It's very raw. I believe that if that type of endeavour, arranging meetings between victims and offenders or protagonists, the different protagonists, if that was properly funded, we'd be further along the road than we are. You know.
Properly funded by the government?
Certainly by the government, funded anyway. Yeah. I think it's a necessary part of coming out of a conflict that you target resources at building peace, and that hasn't been done. It's possibly the biggest weakness in the peace process. To the extent I think that we've up to a point stagnated. Some great things have happened. We heard those school children who were born after the Good Friday Agreement who are in integrated education. But that sector only represents, I think I'm right in saying, about 10% of school children overall. Great is happening. A lot to be learned from it. That should have been more widely resourced and its successes, copied.
Yeah, because based only on private initiatives is quite difficult. And why isn't the government pushing that forward?
There are many reasons. One is, I suppose, a lack of. It gets bogged down on short-termism, where I think the type of funding necessary has to have a more longer-term view. You're not going to see the results within 1 or 2 years. The results that are there come after 20 years of people working very much on their own. Think where we would be if those efforts had been properly resourced back then. So I'm sure it's the answer. But there's also many people don't want that. There's still a fear of the future out there, a fear of people coming together. The Protestant communities think that they have to give ground. If an accommodation has to be reached, that involves them giving ground some of the power or sense of entitlement they've been brought up with. And so you have to break down that sort of negativity and cause people to look at things differently, to appreciate that accommodation benefits us all equally, that human rights isn't for one side of the community as opposed to another section's humanity. That's human rights is for all. And that's a hard lesson sometimes to get across when there's a climate of fear and fostered fear for politics. And I think that's where we are at the moment. We're caught in that. But it's a transition.
Yeah. So Joe, one of the challenges is structural, right? There's this lack of national support or structural programs that push the dialogue forward. But if we look at the situation from a more micro perspective, like at the individual level, there's also, I guess, reasons why individuals don't decide to do what you did. I guess you're an exception overall, and even more so, I guess, an exception back then, right, when you decided to meet Patrick. What do you think moved you that is not moving the victims that are reluctant to engage in dialogue? Or what is moving the victims that are reluctant to engage in dialogue?
Well, from my own experience, I think the clues are in the person I was before the bomb went off. And I studied non-violence and Gandhi's writings as a teenager, and in my 20s I actually spent 2 years living in a hut in the Himalayas, which is an unusual thing to do for a daughter of a Tory MP, I can tell you. So that was a little bit unusual, but I grew up with Vietnam, and I remember just being anti-war and really caring about the world from a really young age, and I had always had this dream of peace, and that was something very important to me. So when the bomb went off, it was almost like, do I give up on the person who dreamt of a peaceful world and stay a victim and close down, or do I find a way to bring something peaceful to this appalling violence? But my emotional intelligence back then was probably 1%. I didn't know how to deal with feelings or emotions, and not that kind of pain. I had no experience for that. And we were offered no support at the time. It's in the 80s, so the idea of trauma wasn't really around then, so nothing.
And that itself brought a whole lot of like problems and things that happened to me because I didn't get the kind of support. You know. But the one thing I knew was that I was going to turn this around. It was very, very strong determination, but it's not a straight line. You know, I went to some really difficult places and almost gave up several times, and you know, it's been hugely challenging. And I wouldn't expect anyone else to do this journey because it has been so hard. And even now, it's not always easy. But what gives me the strength is knowing that I'm somehow changing the future and I can't change the past. And I do lots of different things now. One of the things that I'm doing is supporting and working with the victims of new terrorism. I have an organisation called Survivors Against Terror, and we have a guy whose wife was a Labour MP who was killed by the far right, Brenton Cox. We have someone from Tunisia who lost her husband and she was badly injured, someone from Brussels, and many others from Manchester Arena, the attack, you know. And I know many of these people, and actually their basic needs aren't met. So how can they move on to bring something positive when they don't have mental health support? You know, the compensation is appalling, and the UK is far behind every other European country because we're doing comparative studies in Spain, and I don't know the situation here in Portugal, but I know Spain is way ahead in terms of looking after victims. UK is way behind. You know, we do not look after our victims. And so when someone is so struggling because their 14-year-old daughter can't go to school, you can't expect them to do something positive. So I think there's something about people's needs being met. And what I've seen with some of the programs I went to earlier on is that sometimes people would arrive at these programs full of hatred and anger and bitterness, then they'd be listened to. And being listened to is really important for people who've been affected by violence or anyone. We need our stories heard, acknowledged, witnessed. And then through being heard, then they move to the next step. And I remember one guy, he was he wasn't, his son was a soldier who'd been killed. And I remember the first time we met him at a place in Ireland, we go there to hear each other's stories, people being affected by the conflict, and he was like, I'd never meet anybody who was in the IRA, I just want to kill them all. And 6 months later, he's in the room, and he's listening to people's stories of people who've been in the IRA. And what changed in that 6 months was some of his needs are being met. Some of his needs to be heard, to be acknowledged, to go, that's tough what you've been through. And then he himself was ready to make those next steps. So first of all, I think that there's something about war, and I know that some of you in your own countries have experienced different kinds of violence. And there's something about just needing that emotional support to be heard. Now, I did things the wrong way around because my emotional support came a lot later, and that also had repercussions on me, but it's much better to get it at the beginning. We know so much more about trauma, how it's in the body, and what we can do about it, that kind of listening and support. And then when people start to feel better, it's their timing, their way. And I think we're very unusual. One of the first things I said, well, the last thing I said to Pat at the first meeting was, I'm so glad it's you. And that's recognizing, actually, I think he's quite unusual. The fact that he opened up, and I could see his pain of really beginning to understand the impact of what he did, you know, and take that responsibility. That's quite hard, you know, and I don't think many people would do that. So it's not always about this kind of dialogue. It can be many different of other dialogue that can happen, and moving on and bringing something positive. I mean, a lot of people do bring positive things out of what's happened to them in different ways.
Mm-hmm. But for a movement to be big enough to really promote reconciliation and contribute to build peace, you would say then people would need first to feel heard and their needs to be... And is that the reason why truth is so critical in such a process?
We need to create a very safe place for people to be heard without being judged or told they're wrong or told they need therapy, just to be listened to. And you can start with single identity, so you can have just if people have been affected by this kind of violence or this kind of violence, and then when they're ready you can make it bigger. But the whole thing is emotional safety. It's really, really important. And that involves preparation. So you'd never bring people together. I also do a lot of restorative justice and restorative processes. Similar with that, you'd never bring people together unless you felt they were ready. You'd done risk assessment. I mean, I did do my own risk assessment with Patrick. Like, I knew he wasn't going to hurt me. That was enough. No. But I think we need to do it with so much care. But in the end, it is about people coming together and listening and dialoguing. And I think what's changing is all around the world there are these fantastic models of it working, whether it's Father Michael Lapsley in South Africa with the healing of memories, or some of the dialogue in Northern Ireland, or the restorative processes where you create that safety, people come together and to listen. And with ground rules, they're important. As people just speak from I, that authentic voice. And so I can talk about how I'm impacted by what you say, but I'm not going to say you're wrong for what you've said. Little simple things like that. So there's lots that we know and that we can do. But it's so much better to not have the conflict, because we're talking about generations of healing. It just takes so long. And I said in the film, I'm doing this to stop the cycle of violence and revenge in me so I don't pass this on to my children. And generations get handed down this trauma. And I actually think around the world we are all traumatized. We've all been passed on trauma from what's happened from the past generations, and we're all playing this out. And we really need to find a way to heal that trauma and to heal the root of it all, which is somehow my needs are more important than yours, therefore I have a right to do this to you. But actually instead go, I want to hear your story. How can we live together? How can we share this land and these resources? How can we work together to stop climate change? How can we stop together to stop the arms race? But that involves giving up, I'm more right than you. And that's, as human beings, we can find that hard. We're quite attached to being right and justification,
Yeah, you made me think of how Harold Good, the Protestant, how he says that what is needed is grace, no? And that what is relevant in that moment is to give each other the chance to start from anew, no? To give each other a new beginning. And that it's not about who deserves what. And I guess anytime, anywhere, we're all constantly attached to, I do deserve this, I do not deserve that, no? And that doesn't allow us to say, no, it's not about deserving, it's about being generous, no?
Yeah.
In a way.
Definitely. And it's about, if I hear your story and empathize with you, then I'm going to want for you the same human rights that I want for my own family. I'm going to want for you your needs to be met in the same way. And I'm going to work for that. I'm going to work to make sure that you have the same rights, because I care about you now I've heard your story. And that's what Pat has taught me. And I think we can apply that. I think we need to apply that to everyone in the whole world. It's no longer the time just to say, I only care about my country, my community. And of course, I come from a country which is very good at just thinking about itself. But I want to change that.
What do you think, Pat? It's interesting because, I mean, you're allies in a way, no, in this path, in this journey, and you're both, well, absolutely courageous individuals, very special, and that's what explains what you've been able to do. And at the same time, so with such different backgrounds and personal stories, no, with your experience. As if it was a preparation when you were studying Gandhi and you were, no? Yeah. Surrounded by theories of peace as you were a teenager, early 20s. And you coming from a completely different personal experience. No? And for example, now when Jo was speaking, what do you think about how she build her ideas? I'm not sure I'm framing the question correctly, but...
I mean, there's, I do get it, because there's an overlap in part of my own life where, I mean, I was grew up and became politically aware in the 60s and 70s, and you were aware of what was happening in the world, and you're of that generation that wanted to do something about it. You know, you weren't going to make the mistakes that your parents' generation had made, landed you in the mess of the world, and you thought that you were in a position to do something about it. We were very idealistic. And for Joe, when I identify this, it begins with the self and what changing yourself, and I completely get that. I'm just acutely aware of, because of my own lived experience of the conflict I've come through, of the imbalances of power in the world, where power resides. And as long as we don't lose sight of the fact that it's at that level where the real change needs to occur, you know, certainly change yourself, change your community, but it's got to also involve the real power players who, because they have all the power and all the resources, and who, in many regards, choose violence as a first option, even though you would imagine having those resources would give them choices, but they choose not to try open political means of creating a more equal society. Rather, they want to ensure the old order maintains, which is usually oppressing of people, denying of political rights, the stealing of resources from other countries. I mean, this massive power balances out there. That's at the root of all the political problems in the world. But I completely agree. I hope in my own self that I've tried to change me, you know, and the way I deal with other people, you know, because I do believe, it's the Gandhi line, be the change. I completely buy into that, I think it's no good waiting until we get some future society and then implement a program of, equality. The way you deal with people in the here and now should somehow prefigure what you're trying to build, It's the way you deal with people now. You'd hope, by example, that in itself will move things forward, and I think it does. But we mustn't lose sight of where the real culpability is of what's going on in the world, and it's the hate of politics.
Yeah. So this idea that we hear Evelyn Glenholm saying that in any society that is not human rights centric, those who feel oppressed at some point will maybe not necessarily all the time come out fighting, but somehow rebel, against the situation of...
I don't think anybody sat around and said, like, we have no rights and we've got to work to end them through violence. Nobody arrived at that conclusion. They tried all these other options. Violence came on to the agenda when those other options failed. The normal means of political protest, extra-parliamentary protests, forming alliances, etc., marching, all of that was tried and came right up against the power of the state that didn't want to concede ground. And in that vacuum, violence came into it. And we've got to remember, too, that I have to make this argument specific to what I understand to be the situation in Ireland in say, the late 60s. The British state, before there was even internment, was looking at its experience in other theatres of war that ended only within the last decade, where they had used torture tactics in Aden and places like that, honed them down and trained people for their usage in Ireland before there was even introduction of internment. So that's the deep sort of planning the state is capable of. We weren't even aware of that. The people who had been arrested and brought into for a deep interrogation didn't even know where they were being held, or these places existed. the location of some of these spots were only declared decades later. That's how secret it was. That's a deep core state, you know, and that power was used against poor people where I come from, and we felt all we could do was resist that with our only means. This is what I absolutely fundamentally believe. You resort to violence through weakness, you know. If you had the political means of change, affecting change, you would grab them, go for that. We only were able to come out of violence once we gained political power, against a backdrop of people in power trying to keep us powerless politically. But there was a point when they could no longer do that, and they had to negotiate with us. And I go back to that other point. Even though the state has all the power, they chose violence. You know, I find that incredible, to be honest. So you have to ask yourself the question, why is that? You know? And I don't think they're doing it in the name of all of the British people or the English people. They're doing it for very narrow ends and hiding it from their own people. So that's the sort of world we live in.
Yeah. I remember one of the things that struck me the most was when I found out, I think it was in this conversation with this man from EPIC, the one that at the beginning of the documentary is showing me around the Protestant neighborhood, how he explained that at some point his community, so those people belonging to the UDA, UFF, realized that they had been used by rich Protestants to make them believe that their problem was not a class issue, meaning that their problem was not that the rich in their same community were stealing money from them or using them, but that their problem, the problem of poor Protestants, were poor Catholics. And so I remember him sharing of course very frustrated, sharing how they all felt used by rich people from their own community, used in order to start this fight against you, let's say, against Catholic communities, in order to deviate the tension against them, no, in a way.
What struck me about most of the people around that table who had been involved in violence previously was that they all would have thought in terms that they were defending their communities. They wouldn't have had sort of like a real broad understanding of the power politics at play, and none of us did. Most of this was hidden from us. We might have some sense of what's happening in the world, but we didn't understand the full picture of it. So for many of us, the early involvement in using violence came from just the need within a community to defend itself. And most of my political thinking and understanding of what we'd come through occurred in jail. I mean, I was interned in the early 70s for 2.5 years. Spent most of my time during that period reading up as much as I could. The most sought after book in the internment camps was written by a British general, and he wrote a book called Low Intensity Operations, based on his experiences of breaking down freedom movements in other countries. And he did it by control of civilian populations, etc., control of the judicial systems, etc., and closing down information. You know, and that was a blueprint for what the British state imposed on Ireland. Most sought after, thumbed through book in Longkesh during the years I was there, written by a British general.
So you've shared some bits of it, but so I guess in how Northern Ireland has dealt with the conflict, there are some things that have been done well and some others that could have been done better. Do you think you have an idea, or are there things that you would like to underline in terms of what has been done properly and what not, and what would you do differently if you were in another country?
Well, I think Pat talked about needing more resources and funding, and I know that Northern Ireland did get a whole lot of funding from the EU after the Good Friday Agreement, but it still needs a lot more. Needs a lot more. There's still people there who haven't shared their stories, and there are also, a lot of people in England were affected and haven't been able to share their stories because they all live in different parts of the country. So a lot more resources and funding. And I think for me, one of the biggest obstacles we have with, I'm going to have to mention Brexit. I didn't want to, but there were all sorts of lies and misinformation. I won't go into all of it, but I don't think people in England understood the impact if we were leaving the EU on the Good Friday Peace Agreement. I remember the morning after the referendum, I felt completely traumatized, just in shock. I went to see my wonderful mother, who I adore, who voted Brexit. And I said to her, look, let's just not talk about it. I haven't slept. And she went, oh, just tell me one thing you're worried about. And I said, the Good Friday Agreement, the border, what's going to happen to all the projects that from the EU? And she said, oh, don't worry, something will happen. And I said to her, let's not talk about it. And okay, so that was, what, is it 4 years? 3 years, seems like 10 years. But actually, people in England are only beginning now to be aware of it. And I got to speak at this amazing peace walk from Belfast to Derry after the appalling murder of Lyra McKee, the journalist. And I said to the audience there, I said, as an English person, I'm so sorry that it seems like we don't care about you, and that our politicians in Westminster aren't listening to you and caring about the effects of Brexit to all of you that live here. And I think that is changing. I think people are becoming more aware. I've heard people go, gosh, if I'd known, and they didn't know, but also, why didn't people know? So I think one of the things that speaking as someone who lives in England, and I do a lot of work in schools, and I do as much as I can, but I'm just one person, but I think that we should have had much more awareness in England, and Wales and Scotland probably did have more awareness, because our islands are closely connected, and it's very much a shared healing solution is needed. So maybe now more people do care, but I think if that caring had been there at the beginning, that also would have helped. I mean, there's lots of things that's needed. I mean, I think there's the whole thing of justice. A lot of people wanting justice, and the British government not wanting to give answers and still not being honest. I mean, it's still a complete mess, and that's why we just need to avoid this happening, because it's so complex, it's so difficult to heal after that kind of conflict.
And what would be just in such a situation? Because I remember that was the question that was constantly in my head.
Well, justice means different to everyone. I actually went to Bosnia with a group from Northern Ireland. It was a fantastic project that brought some people, and everyone in the group had some story of being affected. And we heard stories in Bosnia, right, which shocked everyone. And I left Bosnia feeling, I am lucky I have a body, seriously, because a lot of people in the world whose loved ones are killed in war don't have a body to bury. We have a body. I came away feeling that, yes, the resources in Northern Ireland were scarce, but compared to Bosnia, we were lucky. And everyone there who arrived from Northern Ireland said they were never going to moan again about what happened there. Having said that, there's still not enough. But I think it's good to get a perspective on it, that actually it's quite a rich country and a lot was given. I can't remember the question you just asked me, actually. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Just went
okay.
off on one there.
No, you were mentioning how so many people are asking for
Oh,
justice.
okay, right, okay.
And I was
So what
asking
does
what
yes,
is
yes.
just in such a situation?
Yeah, so I think it's changed for me. I mean, like, I didn't feel justice in Patrick going to prison, which you might feel that's odd. Because to me, punitive justice doesn't really work. But I wouldn't have had a name. You know, I wouldn't have known who Patrick was if he hadn't gone to prison. But to me, real justice is more restorative justice. And for Pat now, hearing the impact, and he has heard the impact of his actions on me, and he now sees my dad as a real human being, that to me is justice, right? Now, for other people, justice is knowing the name of the person. Like some people, that's really important to know the name. Other people, it's not. So everybody has their different idea of justice. And my sense is, having been to many conflicts in the world and met many people, is that for many people, they're never ever going to get justice. I mean, that's another tragedy. They're just not going to get it. But that's how toxic and ill our world is, that we won't get justice. So the question is, if we don't know the name of the person, if we don't even have the body back, is there a way that we can still find a way to move on, so we're not completely living with bitterness and pain and suffering? Can we let go of that a little bit? And I don't know the answers to these questions. You know, they're huge questions. We've all got our own experiences of it.
Mm-hmm. But back to the question of what has Northern Ireland done well or properly and what not, in terms of the reconciliation.
The lessons learned from the process.
Yeah.
Also, certainly the need that nobody should feel let out of the process, that the process is exclusive, all voices will be included. I think that's very important, and it's exactly, I believe, what Joe was saying. People need to feel that they've been heard and that their pain has been acknowledged, and that goes against the grievances on all sides, that it's there on the table, it's been discussed in opening, and these are difficult conversations, and it's a process, and it could take a long time, but it could form the structure for moving forward, because by dialogue and talk and contact, you gain trust, and you begin to trust the people around that table, and you can lessen the fear that I think is really holding us back at the moment. I mean, if I can put myself into the mind of somebody from a unionist background, looking at the future in the north, particularly in the light of Brexit, that must be engendering a lot of fear about the future. They've been lied to by this person, this union's been lied to by his or her politicians, to the point where they seem incapable of seeing the real other, they're politically in opposition to. They do not see our need for our rights, etc. So allaying fear is also very important and integral to that process of getting people in contact so that they can share their fears and ask these difficult questions. It's all about dialogue and contact.
And also change the justice system in a way that, I don't know if it's the same right now, but 3 years ago, if anyone told the truth about a crime that they had committed, they would still go to jail for less years, but still go to jail. So there was this irony of some people asking for the truth and some others saying, obviously, yeah, I'm not going to tell the truth because I don't want to go to jail. So this...
It's very complicated, because we know that if you go back to this question of culpability, and that most of culpability reside in where the power is, in my view of the world. If you look at that, to concede anything to republicanism is to somehow legitimize their struggle, and that's very difficult for people in power too. So that's the big struggle we have. Republicans sure, you know, in the legitimacy of their struggle, and a state who will not countenance that truth, you know. And somehow we have to get to a situation where everybody can feel open and honest about their part to play, and nobody's going to judge them or deny them a voice because of holding other views. And we have a long way to go in that. There's a big power balance. Yeah, power imbalance.
So the two of you are peace builders, right? That's obvious. And you've been invited to this event that has to do with peace builders. Joe, what would you say describes a peace builder, or what describes you to be here?
Oh, I don't know. There's a commitment every day to bring something positive to my life, to change the future, to see the humanity in everyone, and to let go of the part of me that still wants to blame people and make them wrong, and to take every moment a new moment of growing in being able to love and be compassionate, and still getting it wrong sometimes.
Yes, that was my plan. If I ask you the same question?
When I joined the IRA, and that was in the very early 1970s, 1972, after a lot of mental turmoil, you know, whether I could or should, but eventually did, first thing I was told was, do you realize that there's only one outcome here, or one or two outcomes? You're going to jail, or you're going down a hole. And that's what we faced then. And still we felt that there was no other option. And I've come through jail, and I've come through all those years, and I'm here now, and part of me feels I'm just a survivor, to be honest. I feel so lucky to have come through all of that. And I know a lot haven't. Joe's father hasn't. I have lots of comrades killed. Thousands have been killed and hurt, you know. It's a massive amount of pain, and I'm here, and churned up a bit, but I do feel a survivor.
Is there anything you wanted to say, and I haven't given you the chance to say it, or a message you wanted to convey? And
if anybody's been listening carefully enough, I've used two words quite a number of times, and that is the need for contact and dialogue, which is at the very heart of what you're doing here. And that's the message, I believe, and it's also what we are about.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tivemos aqui esta tarde um teaser para aquilo que vão ser também o nosso dia da manhã e também depois continuidade no domingo. Esta missão que é de todos e que temos aqui nesta sala, como vamos ver amanhã, tantos construtores de paz. Agradecemos muito à Cira, ao Pet e ao Joe este momento que nos proporcionaram. Sem dúvida que vamos agora ter algum tempo para maturar isto que ouvimos e para nos deixarmos desafiar e envolver nesta lógica que nos vai acompanhar. Às 6h30, aqui mesmo ao lado, na Escola Almeida Garrett, vamos ter um momento musical que nos será proporcionado pelo Conservatório de Artes de Loures e que convido todos a estarem presentes e que não percam por razão nenhuma. Até essa hora, aproveitemos para respirar o ar e ver a luz de Gaia neste dia maravilhoso. Temos os jardins aqui à volta, podemos dar um passeiozinho e encontramos-nos às 6h30 na escola. Outro bom desafio, também depois deste painel, é que aproveitem que estamos juntos para conversar uns com os outros e para se conhecerem e estarem com os convidados, falarem um bocadinho entre vós. Obrigado a todos e até já.
First I